Our Teeth is a play about everything and everyone. It is a story of humanity in 3 moments of crisis as told by a theater company, itself limping through the performance, grappling with its own inadequacies. It is funny, self-consciously awkward, and profound. When it first came out, Time magazine called it a sort of hell's a-poppin' with brains. I hope we can fail up to snuff, since failure, far from being a bug, is a hilarious and moving feature of this play. First, I want to place the skin of our teeth in the sequence of Thornton Wilder's work. Wilder's first big success was the Pulitzer Prize-winning novel, The Bridge of San Luis Rey, in 1927. We performed Cindy's adaptation of the novel here in 2016. It is an intimate look at the lives of 5 people who fall to their deaths from a collapsed bridge in Peru, and the friar who tries to read the mind of God in that tragedy. This was the first glimpse we have of Wilder's mode of treating big themes through small and local lives. His second big success was another Pulitzer Prize for Our Town in 1938, for which he is perhaps best known. My first big role in the theater was as the stage manager in this play. And I'm not embarrassed to say that my 16-year-old self at the time was unappreciative of the play's depths. Having directed the play here in 2010, I have been marveling ever since at the third act of Our Town, with its simple rows of chairs on a bare stage to signify a graveyard occupied by the dead slowly losing their links to the living and the earth. It is like a beautiful and profound poem that, trimmed to its core, leaves most of the page eloquently empty. Now, to lay the groundwork for the voice of Thornton Wilder, I'd like to read a passage of the stage manager from the beginning of that act. And I note this will be the first time I've spoken these words in a performance setting in 52 years. This is certainly an important part of Grover's Corners. It's on a hilltop, a windy hilltop. Lots of sky, lots of clouds, often lots of sun and moon and stars. Over there are some Civil War veterans, iron flags on their graves. New Hampshire boys had a notion that the Union ought to be kept together, though they'd never seen more than 50 miles of it themselves. All they knew was the name, friends. The United States of America. The United States of America. They went and died about it. And here is a new part of the cemetery. Here's your friend, Mrs. Gibbs. Let me see. Now, here's Mr. Stimson, organist at the Congregational Church. And Mrs. Soames, who enjoyed the wedding so, you remember? Oh, and a lot of others. And Editor Webb's boy, Wallace, whose appendix burst while he was on a Boy Scout trip to Crawford Notch. Yes, an awful lot of sorrow has sort of quieted down up here. People just wild with grief have brought their relatives up to this hill. We all know how it is. And then time, and sunny days, snow. We're all glad they're in a beautiful place. And we're coming up here ourselves when our fit's over. Again, Wilder's Homespun idiom skillfully renders a vast universe and depth of time through plain, simple, quotidian American language settings and lives. Now, Wilder's next great success was The Skin of Our Teeth, winning the Pulitzer once again in 1942. It is this we are here to discuss, of course, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention The Merchant of Yonkers in 1938, which Wilder revised to become The Matchmaker in 1954, which was then the inspiration for the 1964 musical Hello, Dolly. These are only the high points, but with his entire body of work, Wilder left an indelible mark on American theater and letters. As Paul Vogel has stated, for an American dramatist, all roads lead back to Thornton Wilder. As Jerry's essay outlines, Wilder was very educated and erudite, spoke 5 languages, enjoyed associations with the literary elites of the day, here as well as on the European continent, and was a busy university instructor. But I will keep my focus on the play from here on out. So, first to the play itself. In the third act of The Skin of Our Teeth, the stage manager, as he's trying to bring the audience up to speed, says, "This is hard to explain." I feel his pain. All right. The Skin of Our Teeth is, in its central narrative, structured in 3 acts, each representing a crisis in human existence. And throughout the play, we get glimpses of the theater company breaking out of this narrative for a variety of reasons. So, Wilder opens with a projected 1940s-style newsreel proclaiming the news of the world, making no secret of the scale and ambition of this project. It announces rumors of encroaching ice from the north and soon shifts to showing us the Antrobus family, Antrobus from Anthropos, Greek for human. We are introduced to George Antrobus, the inventor of the wheel and the lever, with his family in their modern American suburban home. Wilder immediately shows us his mashup of eras with its indifference towards contradiction. After all, we're in a period where George is also inventing the alphabet, but nevertheless holds his complete works of Shakespeare precious. The projection screen is then pulled away, and we are in the living room of the Antrobus house. Sabina, the maid, is cleaning up and revealing to us in a rather ham-handed way the expository of the play. It all looks like a shallow, comfortable bourgeois comedy, but things are going wrong. A piece of scenery falls, and an entrance is missed, and the actor playing Sabina has to improvise. Eventually, the actor drops her character altogether and steps down stage and tells us how much she hates being in this play. This is Wilder's other conceit, metatheater. Not only are we following the play with all its contradictions, but we are now following the theater company trying to put on the play. And this is where I reveal to you the adaptations I've made to the script. In the play's main narrative, the Antrobus family lives in New Jersey, and George's workplace is in New York City, much like a substantial portion of the audience sitting in the theater that opening night in 1942. The bridge and tunnel crowd, as folks from New Jersey coming into the city were referred to. It seemed to me that to produce the play here in Tucson, I should, in the spirit of the original, place the Antrobus family their home locally outside the city. Hence, the Antrobuses live in Marana. Correspondingly, all the Metatheater references are set here in the Rogue Theater, and the actors in the play, when stepping out of the narrative, are addressed by their real names. Sabina, played by Miss Somerset in Wilder's original, is simply Chelsea, because that's the name of the actor playing the role for us, Chelsea Baldwin. Likewise, I have updated the theater standard from the 1940s, which addressed the actors with the honorifics Mr. and Miss. But would we refer to Chelsea as Miss Baldwin? Never. Honorifics are no longer practiced in our workplace. We refer to one another on a first-name basis. So, while Chelsea complains about the play and the state of her acting career, the stage manager, played by Chris Pancratz, steps in and convinces her to continue with the play proper. She does. Back inside the story, we meet Mrs. Antrobus, the family's pet dinosaur and mammoth, bridging 60 million years of anachronism. And then the young children, Gladys and Henry. Now, Henry, it seems, has had a troubled past and has been forced to change his name from Cain. This underscores another shifting frame of reference. Not only does Wilder place us in geologic times, but he also casts the play with biblical characters. Mr. and Mrs. Antrobus are Adam and Eve, Henry, of course, is Cain, and Sabina is Lilith, the mythical Hebrew and Mesopotamian night demon and first wife of Adam. George Antrobus then arrives at home with the wheel he's just invented. But wait, a wall of ice is bearing down on Marana. As this ice age encroaches and threatens their survival, a number of refugees come to the house for warmth and shelter. Among them, Homer, Moses, and 2 of the 9 muses. Another frame of reference from the classical world. There are no figures from the Western canon that are off limits for Wilder, it seems. And as the act ends, we see this band of refugees in a kind of cultural lifeboat, educating the children in the event that they can survive the impending ice age. Superimposition is the key to the play. A mammoth and a dinosaur in the same modern American suburban middle-class room with Adam, Eve, Lilith, Cain, Homer, Moses, and 2 of the Greek muses. It's outrageous and fun, and yet it has a lot of food for thought. Wilder, of course, sees no need to play out this crisis, since we know how it works out. After all, we've clearly made it through the last ice age. And there, the first act ends. I'm not sure I need to go into the second and third acts in quite as much detail. The main challenge of this play is, for us, is to rest comfortably in its contradictions. The second act takes place on the Atlantic City boardwalk. This is the scene you see before you here, where George has just been elected president of the Order of Mammals, subdivision Humans. Nods to taxonomy are introduced in this act. It begins with a speech by George accepting his election and remarks by Mrs. Antrobus. We'd like to present this scene for you now. I'd like you to imagine the cheers, applause, and laughter that the ensemble will provide in full production. And if you feel moved to laugh and applaud yourselves, we can't stop you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we give you President Antrobus.
Fellow mammals, fellow vertebrates, fellow humans, I thank you. Little did my dear parents think when they told me to stand on my own 2 feet that I would arrive at this place. My friends, we have come a long way. Well, during this week of happy celebration, it is perhaps not fitting that we dwell on the difficult times we've been through. The dinosaur is extinct. The ice has retreated. The common cold is being pursued by every means within our power.
I beg your pardon.
our memorial service yesterday, we did honor to all our friends and relatives who are no longer with us by means of cold, earthquakes, plagues, and differences of opinion. As our bishop so ably said,
Gone but not forgotten.
they are gone, but not forgotten. Well, I think I can prophesy with complete
Confidence.
Thank you, my dear. With complete lack of confidence that a new day of security is about to begin. The watchword of the closing year was work. I give you the watchword of the future. Enjoy yourself. Before I close, however, I wish to answer one of the unjust and malicious accusations that were brought against me during the last electoral campaign. The charge was made that at various points in my career I leaned towards joining one of the rival orders. That is a lie. As I told reporters of the Atlantic City Herald, I do not deny that a few months before my birth I wavered between pin feathers and gill breathing, as did many of us here. But for the last 1,000,000 years, I have been viviparous, hairy, and diaphragmatic.
Thank you very much, Mr. Antrobus. Now I know our visitors will want to hear a word from that gracious and charming mammal, Mrs. Antrobus, wife and mother. Mrs. Antrobus!
Dear friends, I don't think I should say anything. After all, it was my husband who was elected, not I. Perhaps, as president of the Women's Auxiliary Bed and Board Society, I have some notes. Here they are. I should give a short report from some of our committees meeting in this beautiful city. Perhaps it may interest you to know that it has at last been decided that the tomato is edible. Yes, the tomato is edible. A delegate from across the sea reports that the thread woven by a silkworm gives a cloth. I have a sample of it here. Can you see it? It's smooth, elastic. I should say it's rather attractive, though personally I prefer less shiny objects. But I could go on talking forever. As Shakespeare says, a woman's work is seldom done. But I think I should join my husband in saying thank you and sit down. Thank you.
Mrs. Antrobus, we understand that you are about to celebrate a wedding anniversary. I know our listeners would like to extend their felicitations and hear a few words from you on that subject.
Oh. I've been asked by this kind gentleman. Yes, my friends, this spring, Mr. Antrobus and I will be celebrating our 5,000th wedding anniversary. I don't know if I speak for my husband, but as for me, I can say I regret every moment of it. I beg your pardon. I mean to say I do not regret a moment of it. I hope none of you catch my cold. We have 2 children. We've always had 2 children, though not always the same 2. But as I say, we have 2 fine children, and we are very grateful for that. Yes, Mr. Antrobus and I have been married 5,000 years. Every anniversary reminds me of the time when there were no weddings. We had to crusade for marriage. Perhaps there are some women within the sound of my voice that remember those crusades and struggles. We fought for it, didn't we? We chained ourselves to the lampposts and made disturbances in the Senate. Anyway, we women got the ring. Some men helped us, but I must say most men blocked us at every step. They said we were unfashionable. feminine. I only bring up these unpleasant memories because I can see signs of backsliding from that great victory. Oh, my fellow mammals, keep hold of that. My husband says the watchword for the year is enjoy yourselves. I think that's very open to misunderstanding. My watchword for the year is save the family. It's held together for over 5,000 years. Save it! Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Antrobus. We had hoped to show you the beauty contest that took place here today. President Antrobus, an experienced judge of pretty girls, awarded the title of Miss Atlantic City 2024 to Miss Lily Sabina Fairweather, charming hostess of our Boardwalk Casino. Yes, thank you. Unfortunately, however, our time is up, and I must take you to some views of the convention city and conveners enjoying themselves.
This Act 2 consists of what becomes an incontinent celebration full of mad gambling, drunkenness, and careless infidelities. People enjoying themselves. And ends with George and the family loading 2 of each kind of animal onto a boat to escape a catastrophic flood. Yes, we know how this one ends too. And true to Wilder's shifting frames of reference, we're not talking about a geologic event, but a biblical one. Along the way, Chelsea will once again take some metatheatrical convincing to carry on with the play. The third act returns to the Antrobus home in a bombed-out state of disarray. Sabina enters, looking for Mrs. Antrobus, and announcing that the war's over, the peace treaty has been signed. Suddenly, another metatheatrical event occurs. The stage manager enters and announces that some of the actors have taken ill. These actors were to play a brief procession of historical philosophers and thinkers at the end of the play. Their parts will have to be recast with volunteers, various non-actors involved in the production, dressers, costumers, etc. A short rehearsal for the volunteers is played out in front of the audience, and the act restarts. Sabina re-enters and discovers Mrs. Antrobus and Gladys with a baby emerging from the basement shelter. Henry arrives, and we find that he has been commanding the enemy army. In fact, Henry is the enemy. Antrobus, the equivalent to the Allied commander, comes home, confronts Henry, and ultimately resolves to have Henry remain in the house. And then, a final metatheatrical event, the actor playing Henry, Hunter, has a psychological crisis, recalling his own traumatic childhood. Intimacies are shared, there is a small reconciliation, and the play carries on to its conclusion. Antrobus, at first uninspired to carry on with the human project, resolves, through an inadvertent exchange with Sabina, to once again rebuild. In the end, he takes inspiration from his books that have been saved, the wisdom of human civilization. As Mrs. Antrobus settles down to her needlepoint, and Antrobus to his books, the volunteers cross the stage, each representing an hour of the night, a philosopher or thinker, and delivering a snippet of wisdom. We then suddenly restart the play from the very top and quickly announce that the play, like the Antrobus's encounters with apocalypse, will be going on over and over. But the audience can go home. You can be forgiven for being a little confused. I trust it will be much clearer on its feet. There are a great many themes that Wilder is working on in this play. This meal is no small helping. It is so full of ideas that I've given up being concerned about whether we're going to clean our plate in one sitting. You will have a lot to chew on. Certainly, apocalypse is ever present, and there is no scarcity of it in nature, myth, or history, which are the 3 acts of the play. Wilder might have had an extra quality to add to our first act dinosaur if he had known of the current evidence we have of a mass extinction event caused by a meteor. Our understanding of the possibilities and scale of natural apocalypse have expanded somewhat since Wilder was writing The Skin of Our Teeth. And our own war-making technology has become almost unimaginable. Yet, extinction is absolute, regardless of its source. And the play certainly retains its relevance to us today, given that we whistle past a potential graveyard of global warming every time we turn on the light. A principal theme is repetition. Each of the three acts is a chorus of destruction demanding recovery. The first two acts lead up to a disaster, showing the possible route of escape. The third act begins with the world already in rubble and follows the Antrobuses through to rolling up their sleeves and getting to work. Not only is this repetition clear in the narrative, but also, and maybe more so, in the metatheater frame of reference. A constant feature of theater is repetition. As you watch the theater company trying to get through the play, you know that, like the Antrobuses and their crises, the actors did this yesterday and they will do it again tomorrow. Every performance essentially the same, yet distinct in its nuances, which are mostly unrepeatable. As a side note, one thing a director is always careful to honor is the performer's repetition. When spending time in rehearsal, to rehearse is to rehear, by the way, it is crucial to the director's skill to apply time and effort only to those problems that won't take care of themselves. There are generally a vast number of performance imperfections that simply evaporate in the simmering pot of repetition, especially with an experienced ensemble. Among rehearsal tools and techniques, repetition is indispensable. Another theme of the play is embodied in the ever-present son, Cain. Wilder forgoes, in The Skin of Our Teeth, any reference to Satan or Lucifer. The devil is not some outside force, but one of us. Mrs. Antrobus refuses to abandon him, and Antrobus, in the end, insists that he stay in the house. Our dark side, it seems, is part of us and cannot be done without. Something else that is present throughout the play is a reckless and flawed human nature. Lust, pride, and despair. George Antrobus, our hero and leader of the human project, is constantly on the verge of giving up or abandoning his family. Despair is one of the chief antagonists of Wilder's world. The universe can throw any number of catastrophes at us, but despair is the only real enemy. In the end, it is impossible to suppress Wilder's optimism. In a play of recurring crises, and in the world of 1942, it would be easy to be gloomy about the state of the human project. Wilder looks at the world squarely in the face with all its gruesome flaws and has faith that it will once again be rebuilt. Apropos of this, it would be a bit of artistic malpractice not to observe not only the period when The Skin of Our Teeth was first performed, but the actual moment, October 15th, 1942. Less than a year after the attack at Pearl Harbor has brought America into the Second World War. News is leaking out that some kind of genocide is afoot in Europe. And Jerry's essay goes into this in depth. A bit of despair might easily be forgiven. Wilder's audience has survived the Great War, a pandemic, the Great Depression, and is looking at yet another world war. Civilizational crisis is getting to be a habit. And Wilder writes The Skin of Our Teeth without the knowledge that in less than 3 years, the first atomic bomb will be released in anger. I've been wondering what this play might look like if it were written just 3 years later. Human nature doesn't seem to have elevated since. But it wouldn't be unreasonable to imagine Wilder continuing his optimistic posture. After all, the play's title The Skin of Our Teeth has baked into the expression survival. Harrowing, but positive. One thing I'd like to note is that this play is only telling a tale of the human race from the Western point of view. Antrobus is American, the setting is American, and the great philosophers and thinkers are all drawn from the Western canon. Wilder was, of course, well aware of the wider world, having spent a portion of his youth in China, so I doubt that this was naivete on his part. One can only determine that his choice of remaining with Western culture in telling this tale would be speaking to the audience he has. Thornton Wilder always struck me as someone who met his audience where it was. Now, as to our production. Let me say that this is the wildest and certainly the most ambitious play I've ever been involved in. Wilder's refusal to be tied down to any precise period or frame of reference has had us constantly barreling forward and simply accepting that there and then is here and now. More than once an actor has requested of me a reasonable choice on any number of circumstantial contradictions in the scene, and I have had to remind them that linear logic is of no concern to Wilder's vision. So the actor makes up whatever might energize them for the next action. Our acting training is generally geared towards specific styles of theater. The Skin of Our Teeth defies such restriction, or at least has us playing a variety of styles throughout the performance. There's one element to the shape of the play that I'd like to point out. The play starts with outrageous and burlesque satires of both 1940s newsreels and comfortable popular comedies, followed by a fit of temper by a prima donna, and then the appearance of a dinosaur and a mammoth. The approach is broadly comic in the first two acts, but shifts its tone in the third. Like the news of the king's death and Love's Labour's Lost, the play takes an unapologetic dramatic turn at the end. If we follow the nature of the apocalypses, the first two acts are natural disasters, but the threat of the third act is from within. We may indeed be our own worst enemies. With The Skin of Our Teeth, it turns out, we've been up to much more than just enjoying ourselves. An interesting challenge that Wilder presents in the roles of Henry and Gladys. They are quite young in the first act, 7 or 8 perhaps, adolescent in the second act, and adults in the third act. Yet the script reads like they are played by the same actors throughout. And given a style that includes actors in dinosaur and mammoth costumes on stage, it becomes perfectly reasonable to use adult actors for the roles all the way through. One might think that this is a lot to ask an actor, but it becomes clear in rehearsal that playing a child offers the actor the opportunity to connect unabashedly with the world of play. Simply put, playing a child makes connecting with the world of make-believe so much easier. There's nothing like being able to shed inhibition. Sophie and Hunter are a delight to watch in this. In rehearsal, we have discovered that Lily Sabina and Mrs. Antrobus at times seem to be two aspects of the same woman. And coincidentally, Chelsea Bowdren and Carly Preston played Mrs. Diebread 1 and Mrs. Diebread 2 to Matt Wally's Diebread in Dylan Thomas's Under Milkwood last season. A very similar conceit with the ladies' roles reversed. These are some of the remarkable things that unfold with a fixed ensemble. There's a kind of cultural deja vu that can take place. Now, in conjunction with leaving the actor adrift in embracing the wild improbability of his world, Wilder seems to have little concern in presenting a theater company in performance with any reality as well. He will have someone break the narrative conceit, engage the audience, then have the other actors step on stage and watch what unfolds, and argue over obstructions to continuing with the play. This is something actors would never do in reality. If this were to happen, we would stay backstage, listen on the monitor, and let the stage manager sort it out until we can get on with the play. Wilder's struggling company of actors is as much a fiction as are the Antrobuses and their world. And this becomes most evident in the third act when the actor playing Henry loses control, breaks down into a confession of his personal trauma. We've taken to calling this the therapy session. There is no acknowledgement in this case of the audience or the urgency of performance, but just stopping and talking it out. Wilder completely jettisons the reality of a performance. By the way, most actors, myself included, want nothing to do with stepping out in front of an audience without knowing or having any lines to say. The most recurring aspects of the classic actor's nightmare is first, not knowing one's lines, and second, being naked, and often at the same time. Now, for your added entertainment, we've also come up with a metatheatrical scene change between the first and second acts, executed by the cast. Chris, the stage manager, comes out and tells us that the stage crew is sick or on strike, whatever he comes up with that day, and tells the cast to change the set from the Antrobus house to Atlantic City themselves. Through no small amount of griping and chatter, they get on with the job. These metatheatrical moments in the play are some of the most fun for the company. I have asked them to imagine the unfolding events as real and to react in their own ad-libbed way. So these have become a bit of a controlled group improvisation. What if you did come out in front of the audience and had it out with an actor presuming to ruin the play? We've stumbled on some very clever and delightful stuff, and if you listen closely, you'll get something of a backstage tour. I'd also like to say something about projection, which you saw when you came in. We have somewhat religiously avoided projections at the Road. We felt that it promotes a kind of sitting back and disengaging the imagination on the part of the audience, particularly when projections are used to complete the reality of a setting or an emotional tone. In this case, however, I felt that Wilder is using the newsreel projections to underscore the scale of his narrative. His stage directions describe the projections as lantern slides, and Christopher has assembled some first-rate, where are you? There you are. Has assembled some first-rate images for the news of the world. And I want to say something about that image that you saw when we first came in. It's an homage to the poster on the original Broadway production. Only it's shaped with our actors in it. It's something that Christopher came up. It's just marvelous. Okay, now Finnegan's Wake. Finnegan's Wake. It's only 628 pages. Now, there is a troubling or amusing, depending on how you wish to view it, scandal surrounding the source material for The Skin of Our Teeth. The play, having opened in October 42, was viewed by Joseph Campbell shortly after it opened, and who then, with a colleague, Henry Morton Robinson, wrote a critical piece in the Saturday Review titled, "The Skin of Whose Teeth? The Strange Case of Mr. Wilder's New Play and Finnegan's Wake." Campbell wrote his recollection of it years later. He said, "When I went to see Thornton Wilder's The Skin of Our Teeth, which was the big Broadway hit at the time, all I heard was Finnegan's Wake. I phoned Robinson and I said, 'Good God, here's Wilder making tons of money and a lot of fame on this thing, and it's simply Finnegan's Wake.' Joyce had just died and his family was destitute. So I said, 'I think we should write a letter to the New York Times.' So, while doing my research on this play, I stumbled on this particular controversy, and it suggested that whether the accusation had merit or not, I ought to read Finnegan's Wake by James Joyce. Oh God, you're ahead of me. If for no other reason than to get a feel for the play. I'm going to go out on a limb here and ask for a show of hands. Be honest now, how many of you have read Finnegan's Wake? All of it. Oh, we found one.
About half of it.
I was prepared to salute to somebody, but it is very revealing that it's very hard to find even one hand in a room full of very educated people on this novel. I had heard that it was a difficult novel, and I'm not a great reader of difficult material. I lack patience, perhaps. But I decided that I'd read the novel anyway in preparation for this open talk so that I could say that I'd read Finnegan's Wake so you don't have to. Alas, difficult does not even begin to describe Finnegan's Wake. I can say that I've read 300 of its 600 pages. So I can say I've read half of Finnegan's Wake so you don't have to. But I'm certainly not foolish enough to presume that it's all nonsense and there's nothing going on there. Thornton Wilder himself was one of the first champions of what was well known to be from the first publication in 1939, a novel that was virtually impossible to decipher. It seems to be literature for an educated elite, loaded with classical references and puns and wordplay in a variety of languages. It's thought that Joyce's prose here is a kind of dream language, with assorted languages and figures of speech colliding in clever and often incomprehensible ways. And in fact, reduction to a linear plot at all, according to some of its champions, is a fool's errand. Joyce's prose is up to something else, evidently. I wouldn't pretend to understand it, but it makes sense that Wilder had a leg up on sorting it out since he spoke 5 languages himself and was a well-traveled fan of James Joyce. But to those who have decoded some of Finnegan's Wake, there seems to be a central figure who is a contemporary man standing in for all mankind in a mashup of all times with plentiful biblical references. Hence the obvious parallels drawn by the skin of our teeth. I cannot speak for whether this is the truth of Finnegan's Wake, but there doesn't seem to be any disagreement among the scholars who have decoded it that that is generally the case, though some insist that defining a plot is misleading. Campbell and Robinson, who wrote that original criticism, were working on a book to be called A Skeleton Key to Finnegan's Wake when The Skin of Our Teeth opened. It was published in 1945. The necessity of such a 400-page skeleton key explanation underscores the difficulty of the novel. Wilder was concerned about the accusation and even wrote instructions to his legal team in case something came up while he was at war in the European theater. He wrote in a preface to his 3 plays, he wrote, "I should be very happy if in the future some author felt similarly indebted to any work of mine. Literature has always more resembled a torch race than a furious dispute among heirs." In the end, the charge has landed with substantial validity, and I stand here indifferent. Finnegan's Wake, as brilliant as it may be, and I admit to being unable to say one way or the other, has proved inaccessible to the vast majority of even educated readers, and therefore its ideas and devices would have remained isolated from the culture at large without something much more producible injecting them into the popular consciousness. There have been few writers more capable of bringing big ideas forth in simple American terms than Thornton Wilder. As far as I'm concerned, James Joyce owes a debt to Thornton Wilder for getting his big idea out from under its perplexing, overeducated rock. And I'm well aware that this could turn into a furious dispute, except that all the main players are dead. You know, I've touched on a whole lot of things here, but it feels like the tip of the iceberg. As I said, it's a big meal. And as we rehearse and produce, there simply isn't time to focus on everything available to us in this play. I hope I've whetted your appetites, and I can't tell you how excited we are to have you see it. This production has been as technically involved as anything we've done. We have a dinosaur and a mammoth, at least 2 fronts for the boardwalk along with a background for Atlantic City, projected newsreels, a massive scene shift, and a roller chair. A well-heeled company would be happy to produce this play with a cast of 35. And they have in the past. We have a company of 12. Very busy actors. Cindy and Chris Pancratz have come up with a great and plentiful costuming, and Chris has been a magician with props. We've brought in Matt Cotton, who's been doing the puppetry for us from the beginning. His puppets you see in the hallway there, to make the dinosaur and mammoth heads. Domino Mannheim's lights, a musical ensemble of flute and percussion. And wrangling us all into place has been Hannah Albayati with the assist from Shannon Wallace, the stage managers. Nevertheless, this is the rogue version of the Skin Martinis. Most productions will be more expensive than ours, but we couldn't get as far as we have without some remarkable talent. Chris Pancratz has been very effective as our costume assistant and props master, while all the time playing the stage manager. Oh, and by the way, he's playing the dinosaur too. Talk about busy. There are other things we could be doing here with this play, but I've decided it's either too distracting or it would draw our time and attention away from telling the story clearly. The Ferris wheel actually turns. This is Matt Cotton's dinosaur drive. This is Chris's pile of sandwiches. And the roller chair. A roller chair, for anybody who hasn't been to, I never knew about this, to Atlantic City is a common thing where you pay somebody and they roll you around on the boardwalk. I've never been there, but last fall, I remember mentioning to Christopher that I was reading The Skin of Our Teeth as a possibility for this season. And I said with trepidation that I found it terrifying. And he said, "It sounds like our kind of thing." Thanks for that reminder, Christopher. Yeah, it is our kind of thing. Thank you.